Ma'am, I said get out of the lobby before I call security. Claire Bennett's voice sliced through the marble lobby of the Whitaker Grand Hotel so sharply that conversations stopped mid-sentence. The sound of rolling suitcases faded. Even the piano music drifting from hidden ceiling speakers suddenly felt distant. Naomi Whitaker stood at the front desk wearing dark jeans, white sneakers, and a simple charcoal sweater, one hand resting on the handle of a small carry-on suitcase. No designer purse. No jewelry flashy enough to announce wealth. No assistant beside her. Just calm eyes and a reservation under her real name. Claire folded her arms tightly across her navy blazer and looked Naomi up and down with open disgust. Penthouse guests don't check in looking like this, she said loudly, making sure nearby guests could hear every word. A man in a business suit near the elevators slowly lowered his phone. A couple standing beside the concierge desk exchanged uncomfortable glances. Naomi didn't move. She had seen this look before. 22 years earlier, when she was 19 years old, her mother had stood in another luxury hotel lobby in Charlotte, holding Naomi's hand, while a clerk insisted there had to be some mistake with their reservation. Naomi still remembered the embarrassment on her mother's face when security watched them like criminals for simply existing in the wrong space. That memory never left her. It built something inside her, something stronger than anger. Claire snatched the black reservation card from the counter and frowned dramatically at the screen in front of her. Naomi Whitaker, she read slowly, skeptical amusement curling at the edge of her mouth. And you're telling me you booked the penthouse suite? Naomi's voice stayed steady. That's correct. Ryan Miller, the young front desk associate standing beside Claire, laughed under his breath. Maybe she clicked the wrong hotel online, he muttered. Motel's 2 blocks down. A few nervous chuckles escaped from the line behind Naomi. Claire smiled just enough to enjoy the humiliation settling into the room. We deal with scams all the time, she announced. People walk in here pretending they belong. Naomi calmly reached into her pocket and placed a matte black card onto the marble counter. Claire stared at it for half a second before pushing it back with 2 fingers like it offended her. Fake cards don't impress me, she snapped. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Naomi Whitaker. Naomi's expression never cracked. That seemed to irritate Claire even more. Ryan, Claire said sharply, call security. Ryan picked up the desk phone immediately, enjoying every second of it. Across the lobby, a young trainee concierge named Emily Carter looked up from her station, confusion spreading across her face as she glanced between Naomi and the reservation system on her monitor. Her eyes widened slightly. Claire, Emily said carefully, I think there's been a misunder. Stay out of this. Claire cut her off instantly. This doesn't concern you. Naomi slowly lifted her gaze toward Emily, noticing the hesitation in the young woman's face. The room wasn't quiet anymore. It was charged, thick with tension, thick with judgment. And Naomi Whitaker stood in the center of it all, like someone who already knew exactly how this story would end. Ryan hung up the phone with a satisfied grin and leaned against the counter like he had just solved a problem instead of creating one. Security is on the way, he announced loudly. Claire straightened the gold nameplate on her blazer and gave Naomi a cold smile that never reached her eyes. You should leave before this becomes embarrassing. Naomi slowly folded her hands over the handle of her suitcase. It already is, she replied calmly. The words landed harder than shouting ever could. A man waiting near the lounge entrance quietly stepped back, pretending to check messages on his phone while listening to every second. Emily Carter stared at the reservation screen again, her breathing shallow now. She clicked through the internal profile attached to Naomi Whitaker's booking and froze completely. There it was in clear bold. Letters across the top of the page, executive ownership clearance. Emily swallowed hard. Her eyes lifted toward Naomi again, then toward Claire. Claire, she whispered carefully. I really think we should double-check this. Claire's head snapped around instantly. Did I ask for your opinion? Emily stepped back slightly, but the tension was already spreading through the lobby like smoke. Naomi watched the exchange quietly. She had built hotels long enough to recognize fear when she saw it. Emily was not afraid of Naomi. She was afraid of the truth. Ryan smirked and tapped the marble counter with one finger. You know what the funny part is? He said. People always act offended when we ask questions. Real guests understand procedures. Naomi tilted her head slightly. Real guests. Ryan shrugged. You know exactly what I mean. The air shifted again. Nearby conversations stopped completely now. Nobody wanted to interrupt what was unfolding. Naomi remembered another moment years earlier in Atlanta during the first year she started Whitaker Hospitality Group. She had walked into a luxury conference wearing a simple navy pantsuit after driving 6 hours through heavy rain because her flight had been canceled. A man at registration looked her up and down and handed her directions to the service entrance before realizing she was the keynote speaker. She remembered the silence afterward, the forced apologies, the fake smiles. But she also remembered something more important. She remembered promising herself that if she ever built something powerful enough, nobody else would have to feel invisible just to enter a room. Claire leaned closer across the counter. Let me make this simple, she said in a low voice sharp enough to cut glass. This hotel protects its guests, and right now you are making people uncomfortable. Naomi finally looked directly into Claire's eyes. No, she said softly. Your behavior is making people uncomfortable. Across the lobby, a woman sitting near the fireplace slowly lowered her coffee cup and nodded under her breath. Even Ryan stopped smiling for half a second. Then the sound of polished dress shoes echoed across the marble floor. Security had arrived. Mark Reynolds, tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing a dark gray hotel security jacket, approached with the kind of confidence that came from believing he already understood the situation before hearing a single fact. Claire pointed immediately toward Naomi. There she is, she said, refusing to leave. Mark barely glanced at Naomi before speaking. Ma'am, I am going to ask you one time to step away from the front desk. Naomi remained perfectly still. Emily looked physically sick now. Mark, she interrupted nervously. There may be a misunderstanding. Claire slammed her palm lightly against the counter. Enough. The sound cracked through the lobby like a warning shot. Then Claire said the sentence that changed everything. People like her do not belong in the Whitaker Grand. And for the first time since entering the hotel, Naomi Whitaker's expression changed. The words hung in the air like smoke nobody wanted to breathe. People like her do not belong in the Whitaker Grand. Claire Bennett stood rigid behind the marble counter, chin lifted, convinced the room still belonged to her. But something had changed. The lobby no longer felt controlled. It felt unstable. Naomi Whitaker slowly turned toward Claire, her expression calm again, but colder now. Sharper. People like me, she repeated quietly. Claire folded her arms tighter. You heard me. Mark Reynolds stepped beside Naomi and motioned toward the revolving glass doors. Ma'am, let us avoid a scene. Naomi glanced toward the exit for only a second before returning her attention to Claire. A scene already happened, she said. You just do not realize it yet. Ryan laughed nervously, trying to restore the confidence draining from the room. This is unbelievable, he muttered. Every week somebody tries to pull something. Emily Carter could barely breathe now. Her eyes stayed locked on the reservation screen, glowing in front of her monitor. Executive ownership clearance. Priority access. Founder profile. Every warning and authorization marker was there. Real. Verified. Undeniable. Emily swallowed hard and stepped away from her station. Claire, she said carefully, please just look at the account details. Claire did not even turn around. I said enough. Emily hesitated, then lowered her voice. But if this profile is real, Claire slammed the keyboard tray shut. You are a trainee, she snapped. Act like one. Naomi watched Emily quietly. Fear and conscience were fighting inside that young woman at the exact same time. Naomi recognized it immediately. Years ago, before Whitaker Hospitality became a billion-dollar company, Naomi had once worked a front desk herself at a roadside hotel outside Dallas. She remembered standing frozen while a manager falsely accused a Latino family of stealing towels simply because they paid in cash. Naomi remembered staying silent because she needed the paycheck. That silence haunted her for years. And she never forgot the look on the little boy's face when security followed his family to the parking lot. Emily looked like someone standing at that same crossroads now. Mark adjusted the radio on his shoulder and stepped closer to Naomi's suitcase. Ma'am, I need you to cooperate. Naomi did not move. Or what? She asked calmly. Mark hesitated for half a second, just enough for people nearby to notice. Claire quickly stepped in before the silence exposed too much uncertainty. "Or you will be escorted out," she announced loudly. A middle-aged woman sitting near the fireplace suddenly spoke up. "She has not raised her voice once," she said. "Why are you treating her like a criminal?" Ryan immediately pointed toward Naomi. "Because legitimate guests do not stand around causing disruption." The woman stared at him in disbelief. "She is standing there with a suitcase." More guests were watching openly now. Phones appeared quietly in hands. Whispers moved through the lobby like wind through dry leaves. Naomi could feel the shift happening in real time. The room was beginning to divide. Not by race, not by class, by truth. Emily finally stepped completely out from behind the concierge desk and walked closer to Naomi. Her hands trembled slightly. "Miss Whitaker," she said softly, "I think there has been a serious mistake." Claire's face drained of color for the briefest moment. Ryan stopped smiling entirely. Mark looked between them, confused now. Naomi slowly lifted her eyes toward Emily. "No," she said quietly enough for only the nearest people to hear. "This was not a mistake." Then Naomi reached into her coat pocket, pulled out her phone, and unlocked the screen. Naomi Whitaker held the phone loosely in one hand, her thumb resting against the screen without urgency. That calmness unsettled the room more than anger ever could. Claire Bennett noticed it too, and it irritated her immediately. "Who exactly are you calling?" she demanded. Naomi did not answer right away. She glanced once around the lobby. Guests stood frozen near leather couches and marble columns, pretending not to stare while staring at everything. Emily Carter remained beside the concierge station, visibly torn between fear and responsibility. Mark Reynolds shifted uncomfortably near the front desk now, no longer carrying the same confidence he walked in with. Naomi finally lifted the phone to her ear. "Angela," she said quietly, "I need internal protocol 8 activated at the Whitaker Grand. Full lobby review. Front desk activity. Security logs. Start now." On the other end of the line, Angela Brooks answered without hesitation. "Understood. Timestamp initiated at 4:42 p.m. Would you like executive monitoring included?" Naomi's eyes never left Claire. "Yes." Claire scoffed loudly the moment Naomi lowered the phone. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "You think pretending to make corporate calls changes anything?" Ryan forced out a laugh beside her, though it sounded thinner now. "People really think confidence can replace proof." Emily stepped forward again before she could stop herself. "There already is proof," she said, voice trembling but louder this time. Every head in the lobby turned toward her. Claire's expression hardened instantly. "Emily," she warned, "stop talking." But Emily did not stop. Something inside her had already crossed the line between fear and conscience. "Her reservation is verified," Emily continued carefully. "Owner-level clearance. Executive authorization." The system flagged her profile the second she checked in. Silence hit the lobby so hard it almost sounded physical. Ryan stared at Emily like she had betrayed him personally. Mark slowly looked back toward Naomi, uncertainty spreading across his face. Claire laughed once, sharp and humorless. "You actually believe that?" she said. "Anyone can fake a profile." Emily shook her head immediately. "Not this level. It is encrypted through corporate access." Naomi watched quietly as the room shifted again. It always happened in stages. First came the insult, then the confidence, then the cracks. A businessman near the elevator slowly lowered his newspaper and muttered under his breath, "Oh boy." Another guest lifted her phone slightly higher, recording now without hiding it. Claire noticed and immediately pointed toward the woman. No filming inside the lobby. But nobody listened anymore. The authority in her voice was fading by the second. Naomi remembered another hotel years earlier in Miami during the early expansion days of Whitaker Hospitality. A white investor once told her privately during dinner that luxury branding required a more polished public face. What he meant was simple. He thought a black woman could build wealth, but should stay invisible while spending it. Naomi bought his shares 6 months later. Claire leaned across the counter again, desperate to regain control. "I do not care what some trainee thinks she saw," she snapped. This woman refused instructions and disrupted guests. Naomi tilted her head slightly. "Your guests seem very interested in staying." Several people exchanged glances immediately. One older man near the fireplace nodded openly now. A woman sitting beside him crossed her arms and said loudly, She has been calmer than your staff this entire time. Ryan's face reddened. You are only hearing one side. No, the woman replied sharply. We are watching both sides. The sentence landed like a hammer. Claire opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, every computer monitor behind the front desk suddenly flickered black at the exact same moment. Then a silver notification appeared across each screen in bold letters. Executive review active. Front desk access temporarily restricted. And for the first time since this began, Claire Bennett looked afraid. The glowing message on the monitors drained the last color from Claire Bennett's face. Executive review active. Front desk access temporarily restricted. The silver letters reflected across the marble counter like a verdict already written. Ryan stared at the frozen screen and whispered, "What is happening?" Mark Reynolds took one slow step backward, suddenly unsure which side of the situation he had walked into. Emily Carter looked at Naomi Whitaker with wide eyes now, realization fully settling in. Naomi stood perfectly still in the center of the lobby, one hand resting lightly on the handle of her suitcase, her phone still in her other hand. Calm, controlled, untouchable. Claire quickly recovered enough to force out a laugh, but it sounded brittle now. This proves nothing, she snapped. Corporate reviews happen all the time. Naomi finally spoke again. Not like this. The silence afterward stretched painfully long. Nearby guests were no longer pretending not to watch. Phones openly faced the front desk now. A man in a gray overcoat quietly muttered, "This woman warned them." Another guest nodded slowly, and they kept going. Claire's composure cracked around the edges. She leaned toward Mark. "Why are you just standing there?" she hissed. "Escort her out." Mark hesitated visibly this time. "Claire, maybe we should wait until corporate responds." "Corporate?" Claire snapped. "I am the acting manager of this property tonight." Naomi's eyes lifted slightly. "Acting manager," she repeated softly. The phrase carried something dangerous inside it. Ryan tried to regain control of the moment by stepping around the counter toward Naomi. "Look," he said, forcing confidence back into his voice. "You made your point, but you still need to leave the property." Then he reached down and grabbed the handle of Naomi's suitcase. The movement was small, quick, but the entire lobby reacted instantly. Emily gasped. Several guests spoke at once. Naomi slowly looked down at Ryan's hand, touching her luggage. Her expression did not explode with anger. Somehow that made the moment worse. "Take your hand off my suitcase," she said quietly. Ryan let go. Immediately, though pride forced him to roll his eyes afterward. Claire noticed the hesitation spreading through her team and panicked. "This is exactly what scammers do," she announced loudly to the lobby. "They create confusion so people feel guilty for asking questions." Naomi looked directly at her. "No," she replied. "People feel guilty when they realize they were wrong." The words landed like a blade sliding across glass. Naomi remembered standing outside another hotel nearly 25 years earlier beside her mother after being denied entry to a charity banquet because staff assumed their invitation had to be fake. Her mother never cried in front of those employees. She waited until they sat inside their car with the doors closed. Naomi never forgot that either. She remembered her mother gripping the steering wheel and saying, "Never beg people to recognize your dignity. Build something they cannot ignore." That sentence built Whitaker hospitality. That sentence built every tower, every ballroom, every luxury suite carrying the Whitaker name across America. And now Naomi stood inside one of those hotels being treated like she did not belong in the world she created. Emily stepped fully beside Naomi now despite Claire's glare burning into her. "I saw the owner clearance tag myself," Emily said, voice shaking but steady enough to carry through the lobby. "And the executive authorization code matched corporate records." Ryan looked horrified. Claire's jaw tightened so hard it almost trembled. "You are finished here," she whispered toward Emily. Naomi finally turned toward Claire completely. "No," she said calmly. "She may be the only employee in this lobby who still has a future here." Then Naomi's phone buzzed softly in her hand. She glanced at the screen once. Angela Brooks was calling back. Naomi Whitaker answered the call without taking her eyes off Claire Bennett. "Go ahead, Angela." The voice on the other end was calm, precise, and immediate. "Executive review is complete. Lobby cameras, audio feeds, reservation logs, and employee terminal activity have all been verified. We also recovered deleted comments from internal staff chat during the last 12 minutes. Ryan's face tightened instantly. Claire tried to interrupt. You cannot just access private employee. Naomi raised one finger slightly, and somehow that tiny movement silenced the entire lobby faster than shouting ever could. Angela continued. Front desk staff attempted to override guest verification procedures without cause. Security escalation was initiated despite zero threat indicators. Additionally, multiple discriminatory remarks were captured on audio. The air inside the Whitaker Grand felt heavy now, almost electric. Nobody moved. Nobody even pretended not to listen anymore. Naomi spoke softly into the phone. And the executive board? Already watching live, Angela replied. Claire's composure finally fractured. This is insane, she snapped. You are acting like she is somebody important. Naomi slowly lowered the phone from her ear and looked directly at Claire. That has been your mistake from the beginning, she said quietly. Ryan stepped backward toward the frozen computer terminals. Claire, he whispered nervously, maybe we should stop talking. But Claire could not stop. Pride had already trapped her too deeply. No, she barked. I am not apologizing because somebody walked in here pretending to be rich. Several guests reacted immediately. One man near the elevators shook his head openly now. A woman sitting beside the fireplace whispered, she still does not understand. Emily Carter stood frozen beside Naomi, staring at Claire with disbelief. She never pretended to be anything. Emily said softly. You decided who she was before she even spoke. That sentence hit harder than the system warnings. Because it was true. Claire looked around the lobby and realized too late that the room had turned against her. The same guests she thought would support her authority were now watching her unravel in real time. Naomi remembered another moment years earlier in Chicago after purchasing her third hotel property. A banker congratulated her on the acquisition and then asked which athlete or entertainer funded the deal for her. Naomi remembered smiling politely while signing documents worth over $80 million. She learned long ago that some people would rather invent another explanation than believe a black woman built power herself. Claire's breathing quickened slightly. Fine, she snapped. Then prove it. Naomi tilted her head. Prove what? That you belong here. The words echoed through the lobby with painful irony. Naomi slowly stepped closer to the marble counter. Her sneakers barely made a sound against the polished floor. You still think this is about belonging, she said. It stopped being about that the moment you decided dignity was something you could ration. Mark Reynolds lowered his eyes toward the floor. Ryan said nothing now. Even Claire looked uncertain for the first time since this began. Then every monitor behind the front desk changed again. Employee schedules vanished. Reservation systems disappeared. A silver corporate seal appeared across all screens, followed by a single line of text. Executive authorization confirmed. Owner presence verified. Ryan whispered something under his breath that nobody fully heard. Emily covered her mouth with one shaking hand. Mark stared directly at Naomi now, like he was finally seeing her clearly for the first time. Claire looked from the screens back to Naomi, confusion collapsing into panic inch by inch. Naomi slipped her phone into her coat pocket calmly. You asked me to prove I belong here, she said. Then she stepped directly in front of the counter, close enough for Claire to hear every word without the room missing a single syllable. Claire Bennett, Naomi said quietly. You just tried to throw the owner out of her own hotel. The lobby went completely silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that arrives when reality changes shape in front of people's eyes. Claire Bennett stared at Naomi Whitaker as if the words physically refused to fit inside her understanding of the world. No, Claire whispered automatically. That is not possible. Naomi held her gaze steadily. And yet here we are. Ryan Miller looked back and forth between the glowing executive screens, and Naomi, like his brain, could not process both at the same time. Mark Reynolds slowly removed his hand from the radio on his shoulder and stepped backward again, the authority draining from his posture inch by inch. Emily Carter stood frozen beside the concierge desk, tears collecting in her eyes from pure relief. She had known something was wrong the moment Naomi walked through those doors. Now the truth sat in the center of the lobby, impossible to deny. Claire suddenly straightened her blazer again, desperate to rebuild control from the ruins falling around her. If this is some kind of joke, you called security on me. Naomi interrupted calmly. You questioned my reservation. You mocked my appearance. You told your staff I did not belong in a hotel carrying my own family name. Every sentence landed slower than the last, sharper than the last. Guests watched without blinking now. Nobody looked away. Naomi stepped one pace closer to the counter. The problem is not that you did not recognize me, she continued softly. The problem is how comfortable you became disrespecting someone you thought had no power. Claire's mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. Ryan lowered his eyes toward the marble floor. A businessman near the elevators quietly shook his head and muttered, "That is the part they never understand." Naomi remembered standing in front of investors in New York 15 years earlier, while a white executive repeatedly mistook her for catering staff despite her leading the entire acquisition meeting. She remembered watching people apologize only after discovering her title. But apologies after exposure never impressed her. Respect that depended on status was never respect at all. Angela Brooks' voice suddenly echoed through the lobby speakers overhead, smooth and professional. Attention Whitaker Grant staff. Executive confirmation complete. Founder and Chief Executive Officer Naomi Whitaker is currently present on property. Guests moved through the lobby instantly. A woman near the fireplace covered her mouth with one hand. Another guest whispered, "Oh my God." Angela continued, "All guest interaction footage from the previous 15 minutes has been archived for board review and ethics investigation." Claire looked physically unsteady now. "Naomi," she said suddenly, voice changing for the first time, softer now, frightened now. "There has clearly been a misunderstanding." Naomi almost smiled at that. "Almost." "No," she replied quietly. "There was an assumption." Ryan immediately stepped forward. "Miss Whitaker, I did not know who you were." Naomi turned toward him slowly. "Exactly." The sentence cut deeper than anger ever could. Mark cleared his throat awkwardly. "Ma'am, I apologize if—" Naomi lifted her hand gently. "Do not apologize because I own the building," she said. "Ask yourself how tonight would have ended if I did not." Nobody in the lobby had an answer for that, because everyone already knew. Emily wiped quickly at her eyes and stood a little taller beside Naomi now. Guests began murmuring openly again, but this time the energy had completely changed. The fear was gone. The illusion of authority was gone. Claire looked around desperately at the same people she tried to impress only minutes earlier, but their expressions had shifted from trust to judgment. Naomi Whitaker stood in the middle of the marble lobby without raising her voice once, and somehow that made her power feel even larger. Then the front desk terminals chimed simultaneously again. This time the screens displayed employee profiles. And beside Claire Bennett's name, a flashing red notification appeared. Access under executive review. Claire Bennett stared at the flashing red warning beside her employee profile as though refusing to blink could somehow stop reality from becoming permanent. Access under executive review. The words pulsed across the screen in cold silver letters while the entire lobby watched her authority collapse in real time. Ryan Miller stepped backward so quickly he nearly bumped into the concierge counter. "Claire," he whispered nervously, "say something." But Claire had nothing left to say. The confidence that carried her through the last 15 minutes was gone now. All that remained was panic trying to hide inside professionalism. Naomi Whitaker stood calmly in front of the desk, her posture relaxed, her voice still measured. She looked less like someone enjoying revenge and more like someone deeply disappointed. Somehow that made the moment heavier. Angela Brooks' voice returned over the lobby speakers. "Executive findings have been finalized. Effective immediately, front desk access privileges for Claire Bennett and Ryan Miller are suspended pending ethics termination review." A sharp electronic tone echoed from behind the counter. Claire's security badge suddenly flashed red. Ryan's did the same 1 second later. Neither of them could access the terminals anymore. Several guests gasped openly. A man near the elevators quietly muttered, "Wow." Ryan grabbed his badge instinctively and tried scanning it against the terminal again. Red light. Denied. His face drained completely. Claire looked toward Mark Reynolds desperately. "Do something," she whispered. Mark lowered his eyes. "I cannot." Naomi glanced briefly toward him. "You can," she said softly. "You can learn from this." Mark swallowed hard. Emily Carter remained frozen near the concierge station, still trying to process everything happening around her. Naomi turned toward her gently. "Emily." Emily straightened immediately. "Yes, ma'am." Thank you for choosing honesty when it would have been easier to stay quiet. Emily's eyes filled again, but this time it was not fear. I almost stayed quiet, she admitted softly. Naomi nodded once. Most people do at first. The sentence settled over the lobby with painful truth. Claire suddenly stepped around the counter toward Naomi, her voice cracking under pressure. Please, she said quickly. I did not know who you were. Naomi looked directly at her. And if I had not owned this hotel? Claire froze. No answer came. Because there was no answer that could survive the truth. Naomi remembered another night years earlier after opening her first luxury property in Houston. She overheard a guest compliment a white executive for creating such an elegant brand, while Naomi stood beside him holding the actual ownership documents. The executive corrected the guest immediately. That mattered to Naomi. Not because he protected her ego, but because he protected the truth. Claire had done the opposite tonight. She protected her assumptions. Ryan looked physically sick now. Miss Whitaker, he said quietly, I am sorry. Naomi's gaze remained steady. You laughed while your manager humiliated a guest. Ryan lowered his head instantly. The lobby doors opened again, and two members of Whitaker Hospitality Executive Operations entered wearing charcoal suits with silver company insignias pinned to their lapels. The room shifted immediately at their presence. One of them approached Naomi respectfully. Ms. Whitaker, transportation to the penthouse is ready whenever you are. Claire stared at the executives in disbelief, the final pieces of denial collapsing inside her face. Angela's voice spoke one final time through the overhead system. Effective immediately, Emily Carter is assigned interim front desk authority pending full management restructuring. Emily's eyes widened in complete shock. Guests throughout the lobby began murmuring again, but now there was something different in the sound. Relief. Respect. Justice unfolding in plain sight. Naomi slowly picked up the handle of her suitcase. Claire stood motionless near the counter while the hotel she thought she controlled moved forward without her. Then Naomi paused one last time before turning toward the elevators. Luxury is not marble floors or chandeliers, she said quietly to the entire lobby. Luxury is making people feel human the moment they walk through the door. Nobody spoke after that, because nobody needed to. The elevator doors closed softly behind Naomi Whitaker, but the silence she left inside the lobby stayed heavier than any sound. Nobody moved for several seconds after she disappeared from view. Claire Bennett stood near the front desk staring at the dead red light on her badge scanner, like reality might still reverse itself if she waited long enough. Ryan Miller remained frozen beside the terminals he could no longer access. Mark Reynolds quietly unclipped the security radio from his shoulder and set it onto the counter without saying a word. Across the lobby, guests slowly lowered their phones one by one, but the expressions on their faces had changed completely. They had arrived expecting luxury service. Instead, they witnessed something far more revealing. They witnessed what power looked like. When it stayed calm, Emily Carter stepped carefully behind the front desk again, still overwhelmed by the announcement placing her in interim authority. The marble counter suddenly felt different to her now. Heavier. Not because of status, but because she finally understood what responsibility actually meant. One of the executive operations officers approached her with a tablet in hand. Ms. Carter, he said professionally. Ms. Whitaker requested that all guests affected tonight receive complimentary accommodations and written apologies before midnight. Emily blinked in surprise. Even after everything that happened? The executive nodded once. Especially after everything that happened. Claire lowered her eyes toward the floor. That sentence hit her harder than termination notices ever could. Naomi had every reason to humiliate people publicly. Instead, she protected the guests first. That was the difference between authority and leadership. Ryan suddenly spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I really thought I was protecting the hotel. Emily looked at him sadly. No, she replied softly. You were protecting an image in your head. The truth settled brutally across the lobby again. A few remaining guests quietly nodded in agreement. Near the fireplace, the older woman who defended Naomi earlier slowly stood and picked up her handbag. Before leaving, she looked directly at Emily and said, Make sure the next person who walks through those doors never feels what she felt tonight. Emily nodded immediately. I will. Upstairs, Naomi finally stepped into the penthouse suite overlooking the city skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the lights of downtown stretching for miles beneath the night sky. Angela Brooks stood waiting beside the dining table with a folder in hand. "The board wants to know if you would like public statements prepared," Angela said carefully. Naomi removed her coat slowly and placed it across a chair. "No public spectacle," she answered. This was never about embarrassment. Angela studied her quietly. Most people would have exploded downstairs. Naomi walked toward the windows overlooking the city. She helped rebuild hotel by hotel, block by block. "People expect rage from women like me," she said softly. "Especially black women. They expect emotion so they can ignore the message." She folded her arms gently and looked out across the skyline. "I did not need to raise my voice tonight. I needed to raise the standard." Angela smiled faintly because she understood exactly what Naomi meant. Downstairs, the Whitaker Grand lobby slowly returned to motion again. Guests resumed conversations. Suitcases rolled across polished marble floors. But the building felt different now. Cleaner somehow. Like something toxic had finally been exposed to light. Emily stood behind the front desk greeting arriving guests with steady eyes and a calmer voice than before. And every single time the doors opened, she remembered the woman in sneakers who walked into her own hotel and got treated like she did not belong. Naomi Whitaker never screamed, never threatened, never begged for respect. She simply stood still long enough for the truth to expose everyone else. And in the end, that truth changed the entire room.